Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. Thank you so much for being here. I know there's always a lot of spaces and places you could be in. So the fact that you tuned into this podcast means a lot, and I hope to make the most of your time here in the next 40 minutes. So those of you who are longtime listeners, I hope you loved the theme last month as much as I did, which was all about self-confidence. Because the longer I'm in the career of wellness, the more I feel like the true work that I do is help women to build confidence in their ability to show up for themselves. And what I talked about last month is that self-confidence really comes from trusting yourself to do the things you said you would do in order to become the person you truly want to be. And think about how you build trust, right? You build trust by showing up regularly. Not just for a few weeks, not just for a few months, but on a very consistent basis over the long term. You build trust not just by reaching a certain result in a relationship, right? You build trust by working through the hardship that shows up in relationships. And you build trust by being curious about the other person, in this case, about yourself, long after kind of the excitement or the novelty of the new things that you try on have faded. So trust, in my opinion, is massively built on consistency. And that's what I want to talk about this month, the value of consistency. And I know in theory we get this, right? I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said before. But in especially the health arena, I feel like it is such an undervalued thing. So a few reasons I want to talk about consistency is because we did just wrap up an entire month on the podcast that was all about self-confidence, and consistency is very closely linked to self-confidence. But the second reason I want to have this conversation, especially right now, is because I just opened the doors to my most popular group program, which is called the Consistency Code. It's a 4-week online program, and it begins on February 15th, which at the air date of this episode is just a few days away. It's like a week away. You can find out more about the Consistency Code program by heading over to theconsistencycode.com. Again, that's theconsistencycode.com. And we even have a special coupon for podcast listeners. All you have to do is, if you register for the program, you'll see a box for coupon, and you'll just enter TCC for the consistency code, TCC Love. That's the code, TCC Love, and it'll give you $50 off the program. So I designed the Consistency Code program about a year ago because a mentor of mine asked me a very powerful question during a meeting that we were having. She said, Courtney, if you had to strip down your work to the absolute essential skills that you believe a woman needs to learn in order to radically improve her health, what would they be? And initially I thought, that's an impossible question. There's so many things. But the longer I sat with it, I started to realize that no, there's actually 4 things I strongly believe can revolutionize a woman's health, both mentally and physically. And here's the craziest part of all. In my opinion, the absolute essential skills a woman needs to improve her health have nothing to do with giving her more information about diet and exercise. And that seems crazy coming out of the mouth of somebody who has spent her life absorbing and studying education specifically about diet and exercise. But the truth is, what I think is the most important thing for a woman to learn how to do is to show up consistently to apply what she already knows. The gap for most women between knowing what will improve their health and actually doing those things is really about 1,000,000 miles long. There's a very wide gap between knowing and doing. So I hear women say all the time, I know what I need to do. Yeah, you do. The problem isn't not knowing. The problem is not doing. You know the things you could be doing. The reality is you struggle with the consistent application of the knowledge that you do have. And honest to God, I have interviewed so many professionals in the health and wellness space who are far more educated than I am. And every single conversation I ever have always comes back to basic lifestyle measures, lifestyle practices, practiced consistently over time that revolutionize health, right? Whether we're talking about hormonal health, mental health, physical health, it doesn't matter. It always boils down to basic measures practiced consistently. So those of you who've been listeners for a while, you already know this about me, but those of you who might be newer, I'm sorry to tell you that I do not have a magic pill to sell you to revolutionize your health overnight or just in a few weeks. I know you wish I had that. And I know that you wish I had that because the success of the diet industry is proof that women want that. James Clear says this really beautifully. He says, success is the product of your habits, not once-in-a-lifetime transformations. And holy cow, have we built a market for once-in-a-lifetime transformations. Because they're sexy, they're exciting. Who doesn't want to revolutionize their life in a few months or even a year? But where are you going to be in 6 years? Where are you going to be in 10 years? That's what I'm interested in knowing. And what I'm interested in teaching is equipping women with the tools that will help them to be successful, not just to create a once-in-a-lifetime transformation, but well beyond. So what I teach are practices that will revolutionize your health. And the definition of the word practice implies that you show up to do the work consistently. The actual definition of practice is to perform an activity or exercise a skill repeatedly or regularly in order to improve or maintain one's proficiency. Health is a practice. So even when you achieve those amazing results you're striving for, it's still a practice. It doesn't end. If you stop doing the work, you stop getting the results. So practice requires a willingness to show up day after day for years on end, hopefully for the rest of your stinking life. Practice requires a willingness to acknowledge your weak spots, minus the judgment, by the way, right? Because you're not going to show up to practice if you're always beating yourself up. Practice requires a willingness, of course, to get uncomfortable. Because yes, while you may practice some things that you're already good at, a lot of the things we commit to practicing are things that we're not good at. So of course, being a beginner is uncomfortable because we have to kind of, be okay with the awkwardness and not being super proficient at the thing. And practice requires a willingness to rework your strategy when you aren't making the progress you'd like to be making. There's a great quote by Matthew Kimberly, who I met at a convention several years ago. He does a lot of work with online business owners, with marketing, things of that nature. But he has this quote. I've read it before on the podcast, but it's such a great quote. It says this: consistency doesn't mean a 100% success rate. Consistency means consistently showing up, developing a process, and trusting in that process. Good golfers have bad games. World-class speakers sometimes bomb. Great directors create crappy movies. But they get back in the saddle because they understand that to perform at your best means you have to show up, control what you can, learn from your mistakes, and get up when you get knocked down. I love that quote. So consistency, for any of you who are unclear, does not mean you will execute things perfectly. In fact, it implies quite the opposite. It means you're willing to keep showing up even when things are really messy and things are very imperfect. Consistency does not mean you only show up when you feel like it. And, I always love to think about, marriage or having children when I think about consistency. Because let's face it, marriage and having children, there's a lot of rough days. There's a lot of days you really don't feel like showing up, but you do because you've made a commitment that you clearly value enough to keep showing up. And, I remind my own clients all the time, 50% of the time that it is time to go work out in my day, I don't feel like going. But I do want the benefit on the other side of it. I am fiercely committed to the practice of moving my body every day for so many reasons. And so I don't really put a lot of stock in how I feel when it's time to go. Consistency does not mean that you have a lack of freedom. I hear a lot of women use this as rationalization for not wanting to have routine around their self-care, right? A lot of them say, well, it makes me feel like I'm too restricted, that I don't have freedom. And that is an optional thought. But it's interesting to me because the same women who are saying that are the same women that I see stuck in a space of not being able to live the life they truly want for themselves. So it is also an optional thought to consider that consistency is what allows freedom. It's what allows you to develop new possibility for your life. It's what allows you to break habits that don't serve you and lean into ones that do. Consistency does not mean that you're boring and predictable. In my opinion, again, it means the opposite. It means you're committed and willing to do what most people are not willing to do. To create possibility for your life that most people will never have because they're not willing to be consistent. So what are the 4 practices that I teach inside the Consistency Code program? Whether you do the program or not, these are beneficial for you to know. Number 1, in week 1, the very first place I start is the practice of awareness. And why I start there is because most women are reacting to life which means they're not making conscious choice about how they want to live their life, at least not with any degree of consistency. They might get really inspired on New Year's Day. They might get really inspired when the kids go back to school. They might get really inspired right before they go take a big vacation. But they don't make conscious choice consistently. And this leads to a tremendous amount of frustration and integrity pain, which again, if you've been around the podcast for a while, you know I talk about integrity pain a lot. Integrity pain is when you're living life in a way where your actions are misaligned with what you truly want for your life. And it causes a lot of frustration and discomfort and disappointment within ourselves. It's a very real kind of pain. So awareness requires that we slow down, that we start looking around and noticing more the consequences of our choices and the choices that we're even making. It also requires that we start trimming some of the fat out of our life, the things that we're engaging with that aren't really serving us. Awareness requires a lot more observing and listening than it does dictating and doing. And no one likes that truth, right? Most women I know are just trying to keep their heads above water, and yet they try to improve their health by adding a lot more things to their already overflowing to-do list without cutting anything out, and wonder why they're ending up in a faceplant yet again. It's no mystery. You can't add more to an already overflowing bucket. So again, you have to get very honest with yourself about how you can unload the bucket. Awareness requires getting brutally honest with yourself about what you're doing, and more importantly, why you're doing it. I have, it's so interesting. I get questions all the time like, well, I had a salad for lunch. Is that a healthy choice? And my response to that is always, I don't know. Why did you choose the salad? It's the intention that we have to pay attention to behind the choice as much as the choice itself. And what I mean by that is if you choose to have a salad today for lunch because you hate yourself and you think you're unlovable until you get to a certain weight, and that's why you're choosing the salad, I would not say that salad is probably super healthy. If you're eating a salad because you really want to nourish your body and you feel like that's an excellent way to do so because you know the value of vegetables, awesome. Super healthy choice. I know women who exercise every day because they hate themselves. And they're literally trying to exercise their way into being a more likable person, a more acceptable person by society. Exercise from that place, not healthy. But if you go to move your body every day because you feel like you're able to show up in the world more powerfully, and you know it's a nutrient for the human body, and that's your motivation for doing it, awesome. Totally healthy choice. But a big part of awareness that I teach with my clients is what are you doing and why are you doing it? Awareness is what allows you to develop smart strategy for filling the gap between where you currently are and where you want to go. You can't fill that gap if you aren't crystal clear on what exactly you're doing already. And it's so funny because women say all the time they know what they're doing. I don't need to write it down. But then they write it down. And it's like they're always surprised at what came out. So the second practice I teach inside the Consistency Code is the practice of organization. Because once women become hyper aware of their behavior, their gaps, their motivations, we have to start getting organized so they can respond to life differently. Because reactions are literally your brain's way of conserving energy. I mean, how awesome is that? That your brain has a mechanism for conserving energy. Meaning, when you've practiced certain behaviors for years or decades, your brain can literally perform those behaviors automatically without having to think, which is awesome if your behaviors are serving you. Not so awesome if your behaviors are depleting you. And here's my point in telling you that. It is unreasonable to expect that you can change your life by continuing to react with behaviors that got you to where you currently are. But this is exactly what a lot of people are trying to do. If you don't organize yourself in a way that encourages you to respond to life with new behaviors, you'll never get very far with moving your life forward. I mean, think about it, right? Imagine saving for retirement with no plan, building your dream house with no plan, starting a business with no plan. I mean, we hear that and we're like, well, of course you wouldn't do that. And yet, this is how most people try to go about changing their health, right? They either don't have a plan or they take the Hail Mary approach, which is I'll hire someone to create a plan. That's where the meal plans, the extreme exercise programs, all that comes in. I call it the Hail Mary approach, the great big measures in short time frames promising big results, which always fall flat. Again, you might get a once-in-a-lifetime transformation, but what happens afterwards? I know women who meticulously plan their business life and their family life and their vacations. But when it comes to their health, it's kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall. They have no strategy. They're just, doing what their best friend is doing or following what they saw in a commercial or buying some new product. They're throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. You need to organize yourself if you want to change your life. You need to make a plan for how you are going to show up daily in order to change your life. And again, a lot of women want someone else to organize their life for them, right? I mean, come on. That sounds great, right? And this is where diets and exercise programs come in, which are largely based on what worked for someone else and rarely, if ever, take into consideration your unique likes and dislikes or your unique life circumstances, which is why eventually they start to feel like an itchy sweater, right? They feel good at first, but after a while, it's like, I can't stick with it and I just can't figure out why. The crazy thing is, women would rather do the same diet that someone else laid out for them over and over and over again because they're never getting sustainable results, rather than learning how to make decisions for themselves and learning from their behavior so they can be self-directed in their own life. And personally, that's what I'm interested in teaching. I teach women how to be self-directed because that is precisely how you develop self-confidence, ladies, is you become the director of your own life. So once we've done a deep dive into organization, we move into the practice of follow-through. The best organization practices and systems are totally meaningless if you don't show up to execute what you planned for yourself. And why don't women show up? Well, there's two primary reasons, in my opinion. Number one, they set unreasonable expectations. So they try to take great big measures in short time frames, right? Too much, too fast, which really either paralyzes them from taking any action or it overwhelms them. So they stop taking action. The second reason I think women don't show up is because they don't manage their thoughts and emotions. And so they consistently talk their way out of showing up. I'm too busy. I don't feel like it. It doesn't really matter anyway. Be careful what you're telling yourself. Whatever you tell yourself, you are going to create evidence for. And why is that true? Because your thoughts influence your emotional landscape, right? And your emotions either inspire you to take action or not. And your results are a direct reflection of the actions that you are or are not taking. So what you think ultimately is reflected in your results. So if you are consistently not showing up for the things you're scheduling for yourself, I would take a really hard look at what you're thinking. Another issue that I think people have is that they don't get results in the time frame they expected them in, so they stop showing up. And my opinion on this is that we have to stop thinking about health as an outcome, right? I know, like we get blood profile numbers done, cholesterol, hormone panels, things like that. We get body fat tests. We weigh ourselves on the scale. All of those things, they're all data, but we also use those measures as outcomes. Well, if the number says I'm good, I'm healthy. I don't operate that way. I think that health is more of a relationship than an outcome. Health is a relationship that needs to be nourished regularly, forever, till the day you die. And how do you nourish a relationship? Well, you keep showing up, especially on the hardest days, right? Because that's what builds trust. You're willing to communicate. So to nourish a relationship with yourself, you have to communicate with yourself. You have to better understand your behavior. What's triggering it? Why do you do what you do? How do you deal with challenges? How do you deal with setbacks? We have to be willing to problem solve. Make the next right decision based on what we currently know. We don't have to see all the decisions we have to make in the future. We just need to know the next right decision. And if it turns out to be the wrong one, we just readjust. We make another decision. And to nourish a relationship, you have to find ways of enjoying the company of the other person. And this is so true of our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with health. If you don't enjoy the things that help you to improve and sustain your health, you will never maintain them. So once we do a deep dive into the practice of follow-through, which is all deeply rooted in mindset work, we move into the practice of realignment. Life is 100% unpredictable. Things happen all the time that we didn't expect, or that we did expect, but we completely underestimated how challenging they would be. So let's just say we buy a new house. We know it's going to be exhausting, and we know that it's going to kind of disrupt our life a little bit. But something as simple as buying a new house can completely throw women off their game for months and years. So the main thing I want you to hear here is that self-care definitely doesn't always look the same. But what separates those who are successful with self-care from those who aren't is that those who are successful are acutely aware of what misalignment looks and feels like. They have a very low tolerance for being misaligned, and they have a lot of tools and strategies to help them realign themselves quickly. This is the practice of realignment. These are the skills that I teach. I know women, and so do you, who can spend years, decades, and even a lifetime living misaligned. And that just sucks. And it's so unnecessary. Realignment is a practice, as is awareness, organization, and follow through. So if you are someone listening to this today who's really sick of spinning your wheels and you want to learn a completely different approach to improving your wellness, one that has no meal plans to follow, there's no supplements to buy, there's no exercise equipment needed, you really should consider joining me inside the Consistency Code program. If you love the Grace and Grit podcast and you've been kind of consuming content for months or years, and you really want to put rubber to the road and learn how to apply the tools that you're learning from this podcast, you should most definitely join me inside the Consistency Code program. This program is the most economical way to work with me. And if you participate in one round of the program, you get invited back to participate in every round that I offer in the future, which is up to 3 times a year. So you can read more about the program and you can read about what past participants have to say about the program by heading over to theconsistencycode.com. Again, that's theconsistencycode.com. You can also find the program on the programs page of the Grace and Grit website, which is graceandgrit.com. And if you're listening to this before the doors close, which is hopefully, right, the objective, the doors close on February 12th because the course starts on February 15th. And as a very valued podcast listener, right, I adore my podcast listeners. You guys are the best. I'm going to give you a coupon for $50 off. So write this down or just sear it in your brain. TCC, which stands for the Consistency Code, TCC Love. That's your code. So if you decide to do this program, you have the $50 off and you just have to use that coupon, TCC Love. All right, my friends. I hope this was helpful. I think this is great information to know, regardless of what you decide about the program. But this program is my heart, right? This program is a culmination of everything I've learned really over the past 20 years, but really boiled down into what I think is the most important stuff for women to know, to be self-directed and ultimately self-led along their health journey. So I'd love you to join me. And I will see you again, or you'll hear me again, I should say, in a few weeks. All right, take care. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story. And it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort. And with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.